The three-time Tour de France champion Greg LeMond, the American, thinks that Tadej Pogacar is going to win at least 7 Tours de France. He knows what the real record is, implying that he believes that the Armstrong record still is the one to beat. Lance Armstrong, of course, won 7 Tours de France between 1999 and 2005. But of course, those were stripped after he revealed that he had used performance-enhancing drugs to win those tours. Now, LeMond is apparently, and he continues to tell everyone, that he was clean when he won his 3 Tours de France, and it was only because of the discovery of EPO that he was no longer competitive and had to eventually decide to retire from the sport. But he believes that Tadej Pogacar will win at least 7 Tours de France. And he even thinks that Lance Armstrong, in comparison, just like my previous video, which discussed how Pogacar is 20% better than Lance Armstrong in terms of VO2 max, which is the body's ability to use oxygen. So even a doped up low VO2 max person like Armstrong, which is what Greg LeMond is suggesting, that over here, a guy with a low VO2 max, implying Lance Armstrong had a low VO2 max, and he was able to win 7 Tour de France's. Well, I don't know about that. I wouldn't say that Lance Armstrong, who had a 85 milliliters per kilo a minute VO2 max, is a low VO2 max. I think he's talking in a relative sense. But is he implying that his 85 VO2 max was the VO2 max of him naturally, or is that actually a VO2 max measured fully EPO'd up? I would think that his VO2 max would probably be higher if he did the test fully doped up. So it's hard to say exactly where Lance Armstrong was in terms of VO2 max during his best efforts in the Tour de France. We can only estimate. It seems like LeMond is suggesting that Pogacar is just naturally more talented. He says that Lance doesn't have his talent because Lance found it at 28, which is kind of late for a professional cyclist these days, but that Pogacar had found his talent at 21 when he won the Tour de France in 2020, beating Primoz Roglic on the final time trial up La Planche de Belfi, where he managed to take out something like 2 or 3 minutes on GC to win the Tour de France. That was a legendary stage and one that I will never forget. I was watching it with my dad, and we were both just in disbelief. Not long after that, my dad no longer supported cycling. In fact, he got me into cycling, and we always used to watch the Tour de France. But nowadays, he just doesn't even watch it. He doesn't believe in cycling anymore, which I think is sad. And I think it's because of performances like the ones of Pogacar. But I don't know. We don't know whether he is performing clean. But I think it's very interesting that Pogacar is 20% better than Lance Armstrong, even though Armstrong was fully doped up using exogenous EPO to boost his oxygen carrying capacity. Now let's remember, guys, VO2 max, it's not a number that you're born with. You're not born with a fixed VO2 max. It's not a number that you're born with, guys. You can actually improve that number when you train. If you were to dope, if a professional athlete had a doping doctor and had a regime to increase their ability on the bike, that would obviously be reflected in the VO2 max. Now that can either be done with EPO like Lance Armstrong, blood transfusions to restore the level of red blood cells in the body, especially when fatigued. During the Tour de France, he would transfuse fresh blood, which contained, well, it was his own blood, which contained the fresh amount of red blood cells, so he could have an immediate improvement in his VO2 max. Now, guys, if you were to do this, it's incredibly dangerous. That's why these cyclists, they had doctors helping them. They knew what they were doing. I don't recommend anyone tries to use any kind of exogenous EPO. Even if they can find it somehow, it's incredibly dangerous, because if your hemoglobin, your red blood cell count goes up too high too quickly, it can actually cause death. And there's other side effects as well. Some people even suggest that Lance Armstrong's cancer may have actually been caused or maybe triggered by the use of performance-enhancing drugs. Anything that's kind of anabolic in nature can promote the growth of cancer. So all of these things, the body is not designed to take these kinds of hacks. These are kind of hacks. The body knows what it's doing. It's trying to keep you alive. It's not trying to make you win the Tour de France. It just wants to keep you alive, keep you safe. It's designed in that way to just have a balance. And some people are genetically more gifted. They create more red blood cells by nature. And maybe it's those people in a clean sport who you would expect to be the best. But unfortunately, as history has proven, people want to use drugs to win. If you get into a sport, you want to do well in it. Someone like Lance Armstrong, who might not have actually been as gifted as Pogačar, who had a naturally high VO2 max, decided to start experimenting with doping and then realized that that can actually enhance his performance a huge amount. Now, guys, some people might be better responders to things like exogenous EPO and other doping methods. Their bodies might actually be more responsive to these tricks, these hacks that can be done biologically. So Armstrong, he was clever, he was smart in the way he did it, but he wasn't so smart in the way that he sort of politically managed the people who knew about the doping. Now, I had a very interesting comment recently from a viewer who suggested that if doping is happening today, it wouldn't be in the way that Armstrong managed it, as few people as possible would be aware of the doping that's going on. And that is, of course, to limit and reduce the possibility that someone would actually leak the fact that doping is going on. So maybe even the athlete, now this person even suggested maybe even the athlete themselves might not be fully aware of what's going on. Now, I have trouble understanding that view because it's so unethical, like especially if you were putting things in this athlete's body that they weren't aware of. Now that raises some serious ethical concerns, and I do hope, and I probably would go as far as to say, is I don't think that is happening. I think if doping is happening in the sport of cycling still today, then I think that viewer was probably correct in that there would be as few people as possible aware of what's going on and involved in it to reduce the chance that the secret would leak somehow. But I do think that the athlete would know about what's happening. But yeah, coming back to Greg LeMond, now this guy, a very, very gifted cyclist, had a very high VO2 max. So if Greg LeMond was actually clean like he says he is, and was, then obviously Greg LeMond, what a legend. And he actually reminds me of Tadej Pogacar. He even looks like him. I actually thought that when I was watching his first Tour de France victory on La Planche de Belleville. I thought, this is a final time trial right at the end of the Tour de France, just like the one that he won all the way back in 1989 when he defeated, what was his name, that guy, what was he called? This is Laurent Fignon. He was a French rider. He was actually really quite a cool guy. I mean, look at his style. He's got quite a unique style to him. He even reminds me of like John Lennon almost, with those circular glasses and just the general image that he portrayed. But yeah, he died unfortunately back in 2010. But this guy was a legend. And in that final time trial where he was wearing the yellow jersey and he was overthrown by LeMond in the Paris time trial, which I think is to this day probably the most iconic time trial in the history of the Tour de France. But in a very similar way, Tadej Pogacar defeated Primož Roglič, just like how LeMond beat Fignon. And look at his time trial setup here, guys. He was using some kind of aero bike here, but look at his kit. He's just wearing regular road kit here. Even the jersey's like flapping around, and he doesn't have a helmet on, and he's wearing his spectacles here. Could you imagine, guys, reading glasses being worn by Remco Evenepoel, for example, and the best time trialist in the world? Obviously, Fignon didn't know or understand the extent of the benefit of aerodynamics, because let's remember, guys, Greg LeMond, who won and took the time back to overthrow Fignon right at the end. Look at his setup. Now, this is a lot more familiar and similar to something you would see in today's peloton. You've got the aero helmet here. You've got tighter fitting jersey. It looks like a skin suit as well. There's no seam here. So he's wearing a skin suit. He's in the drops as well. He's got a low position on the bike frame. It's still a little bit upright compared to today's time trialist, but still miles better than Laurent Fignon. So yeah, in a lot of ways, LeMond was ahead of the game back in 1989. He knows what he's talking about, guys. LeMond is an amazing champion. He understands cycling very well. Whether he was clean, I went to go and see his film. He made a film. I went to see it in Manchester in an independent cinema. It was a really good film, and if you haven't seen it, it goes into loads of detail about his life and his achievements and all the ups and downs along the way. Very good film, and probably the best cycling film I've ever watched, actually. Mond suggesting Pogačar could win 7 Tours de France. Well, he's only 3 away from that. And now imagine, guys, imagine if Tadej Pogačar actually did win 7 Tours de France's. Imagine the conversation. No doubt Lance Armstrong would come up again. And as he continues to just set these crazy records, and as we look at his numbers and analyze things like VO2 max and watt per kilo and start comparing it to past dopers, then really the conversation does inevitably turn to, can we trust what we are seeing, or is this guy actually just the modern day Lance Armstrong? Are we going to be watching films in 20 years' time called The Pog Lie? Could there be an amazing series released on Netflix, making a ton of money for all of the producers involved, revealing the Pogačar lie? Now, guys, is this a business strategy? Are they doping him up for a future payout where they can create a new invincible name in the sport that people are fascinated to learn about his doping? Or is he just going to be a champion that's seen as a clean rider even after he retires, and then we just sort of move on? Now, will people be more likely to watch films and movie series on a clean rider, or are they going to more likely be interested in a scandal? Well, I know what I would probably be more likely to watch. Not a film sort of glazing some guy who I've already spent a lot of my life watching being glazed live on GCN, TNT Sports, which costs a crazy amount of money these days to even subscribe to. And I have cancelled my subscription already after stage 6. And now I have my own personal reasons for that, but it's just too much money anyway. But yeah, I'd be more likely to watch a scandal movie and follow the drama that follows that. It's just more entertaining, and maybe the UCI know that and they're just creating the next Lance Armstrong. Well, we'll wait and see. I just hope that if anything like that is going on, that Pogačar is okay with it, because I actually really like him as a person, and I wouldn't want to actually see this guy suffer any kind of defamatory scandal or anything like that could ruin his life. That's definitely not what I want. And for that reason, I hope one of two things: that he is clean and all this speculation is just a waste of time, or number 2, that he's in on it himself and he doesn't care and he's just enjoying the moment before he enjoys all the attention that comes after retirement, in this crazy theory that I have. But yeah, we just have to keep speculating, and that's what I think people want to sort of think about. Some people don't even want to think about this kind of thing because, yeah, they just like to watch the sport and keep everything nice and sunshine and positive and sunshine and rainbows and stuff like that. But I like more controversial stuff. I like to talk about doping. Anyway, that'll do it for this video, guys. Greg LeMond thinks that Tadej Pogačar will win 7 Tour de France's. I think he could win more than that. I mean, he's 28? Well, I think he's got at least another 5 years in him. And by the looks of it, no one's coming close to him in the Tour de France. So without accidents, without injuries, which he hasn't even had any of those kind of things that have put the Tour de France to an end, he's going to just go on and win potentially 7, 8, or even 9 Tours de France. Guys, imagine if he won 10 Tour de France's. That would be unreal. And I mean, if I am on my deathbed in about, I don't know, 50, 60 years time, I'm still in my 20s, but if I'm on my deathbed and he's still not being revealed in terms of doping, then I will admit this guy was probably clean and just the greatest of all time. But time will tell. Guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't.